For over a decade, Thomas Granger poured his heart into building Granger's Kitchen 13 diners spread across the Midwest, each with a promise of home-cooked meals and a family-friendly feel. It wasn't about franchising or fancy menus. It was about community, comfort, and consistency. Thomas believed that if you treated your employees like family, they'd pass that warmth on to every customer who walked through the door. But something had shifted. Lately, customer complaints had started trickling in. Long wait times, rude service, and worst of all, high employee turnover. Thomas's regional managers insisted everything was under control, citing staffing shortages and economic pressure. Still, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was wrong. The numbers didn't lie, but neither did the whispering concerns he'd overheard during site visits. And so, the man once featured in a business magazine cover as the diner gentleman decided to take a drastic step: go undercover. He picked a small location tucked away in Maple Ridge, Illinois, far enough from headquarters that no one would recognize him. He wasn't just going there to eat. He was going there to see the truth with his own eyes. It was a cold Tuesday when Thomas pulled his pickup truck into the gravel lot of the Maple Ridge location, one of the more remote branches of his 13-diner empire. 2 hours from the main office, it was the perfect spot to see the truth, unfiltered. He left his usual tailored blazer at home and wore the kind of clothes that would let him blend in like just another weary traveler looking for a warm meal and hot coffee. Inside, the diner buzzed with the low hum of lunchtime chatter and clinking silverware. The place looked clean but tired. Vinyl booths were cracked at the seams, and the once cheerful yellow wallpaper had faded under years of sun. A waitress approached. Her name tag read Julie, and her tired smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi there, welcome to Granger's," she said, voice polite but hollow. Thomas nodded and asked for coffee, settling into a booth near the window where he could see both the dining floor and part of the kitchen swing doors. As he observed, it became painfully clear that Julie was juggling too much, refilling drinks, taking orders, clearing tables, and never once stopping to breathe. Every few minutes, a harsh voice echoed from the kitchen. "Julie, you're behind again," it barked. A stocky man in a grease-stained apron, clearly the shift manager, seemed to thrive on intimidation rather than leadership. Thomas clenched his jaw. He hadn't built this company on fear. He'd built it on respect. Watching Julie flinch under pressure felt like a betrayal, not of her, but of the very values Granger's Kitchen stood for. He hadn't just come to eat. He had come to listen. And what he was hearing so far made his stomach turn more than the food ever could. It started as a faint sound, barely audible over the clatter of plates and murmurs of conversation. But as Thomas sipped his lukewarm coffee, the muffled sobbing from the kitchen grew louder. It wasn't someone merely stressed. It was someone broken. He set his fork down. The voice came clearer now, cracking like glass behind the swinging kitchen doors. "I'm trying my best," Julie's voice trembled. "I haven't had a break in 6 hours. I'm doing everything I can." The reply came sharp and cold. "If you can't handle the pressure," the manager snapped, "then maybe you're in the wrong job." Thomas stood, his hands clenched. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was mistreatment, loud enough for cooks to hear, but quiet enough that no customers were supposed to notice. Unfortunately for Rick, the manager, he was speaking right in front of the man who owned the building. Pushing through the kitchen doors, Thomas took in the scene. Julie stood with red-rimmed eyes and trembling fingers, trying to blink away the humiliation. Rick towered over her, arms crossed like a schoolyard bully. 2 line cooks kept their eyes down, pretending not to hear. Thomas spoke calmly, but his voice cut like steel. "Is there a problem here?" Rick jerked his head around, surprised. No, just a little miscommunication," Julie whispered. "I'm sorry." But Thomas wasn't looking at her. He was locked on Rick. "She looks like she needs a break. Why don't you let her sit down for a few minutes?" Rick scoffed. "We're short-staffed. There's no time for breaks during lunch rush." Thomas didn't blink. "There's always time to treat people with respect." Julie looked at him then, not with recognition, but with something even deeper, relief. For the first time in her shift, someone had stood up. And Thomas Granger knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Sliding back into his booth, Thomas Granger stared at the half-eaten burger and fries in front of him. The food, once a symbol of comfort, now tasted like betrayal. He took out a small leather notebook from the inside pocket of his coat, an old habit from his early days building the business when every detail mattered. And now they mattered more than ever. He jotted everything down. The crack in Julie's voice, the stain on Rick's apron, the hostile glances, the overheard conversations from customers, grumbles about wait times, complaints about staff attitudes, whispers about how things used to be better here. But what stood out the most wasn't the chaos. It was the quiet courage. He wrote Julie's name in bold letters, underlined twice. Grace under pressure, he noted. Never once rude to a customer. Then he added Connor's name, the line cook who dared to speak up, backs his teammates. Quiet leadership potential. Across the diner, Julie was back on the floor, her composure fragile but present. She offered a crayon and coloring sheet to a restless toddler. Her hands were steady, even as exhaustion clung to her shoulders. Thomas watched her place a coffee refill beside an older gentleman and offer a gentle smile. And then his eyes shifted. Rick was glaring at her through the kitchen pass-through window, arms crossed, face sour. The man was clearly watching her, not to guide or support, but to catch her slipping. Thomas reached for his phone. "Janet," he said quietly when his assistant picked up. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow." "Everything?" she asked. "Everything," he confirmed. "And I need full employee files for the Maple Ridge location. Reviews, manager evaluations, turnover rates. Everything you can find. Also, get the regional managers ready for a meeting." A long pause. Then, "Understood." Thomas hung up and took one last look at the dining room. He had seen enough. Tomorrow he wouldn't just observe. He would intervene. He parked in the same gravel spot, wore the same worn boots and flannel shirt, and stepped into the Maple Ridge diner just after sunrise. The place was quiet, with only a handful of early customers nursing their coffee and flipping through folded newspapers. The tension from the day before still hung faintly in the air. But something had shifted. Thomas could feel it. Julie was already on the floor. She looked more tired than she had the day before, her posture slightly slumped, her smile thinner. Still, she moved table to table, topping off mugs and offering polite nods to each guest. Thomas waited until she passed by his booth with the coffee pot. "Julie," he said gently, "mind if I ask you something real quick?" She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen window. "I can talk, but just for a second. We're short-staffed again." "I understand," he said. "Just curious. How long have you been working here?" She blinked, caught off guard. "About 8 months." "Why?" Thomas lowered his voice. "You seem like you carry a lot on your shoulders. Is it always this hectic?" Julie's eyes darted to the kitchen. She bit her lip. "Not always. The customers, most of them are kind. But sometimes it's not the crowd, it's—" She stopped herself. "Rick?" Thomas asked softly. Her reaction was immediate. Her shoulders tensed. She looked around, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I probably shouldn't say anything." "You don't have to," Thomas replied. "I just want to understand what it's really like for you." Julie exhaled slowly. "It's hard. We're always short. And when things go sideways, Rick, well, he doesn't make it easier. He adds pressure. A lot of it." Thomas nodded, absorbing her words. "What about Connor?" he asked. "The young man on the line yesterday?" Julie's face softened. "He's one of the few good ones. Covers for people, steps up when no one else does. Honestly, if it weren't for him, I probably would have walked out months ago." Before Thomas could say more, the kitchen door slammed open and Rick stormed out. And just like that, the calm was gone. But Thomas was ready this time. The lunch rush had begun, and Julie was moving fast, taking orders, refilling drinks, managing smiles like a tightrope walker over a storm. Thomas stayed seated in his corner booth, notebook in his pocket, heart heavy with everything he had seen. Then came the breaking point. An older man in a plaid flannel shirt waved Julie down. His eggs were overcooked. She apologized quickly and offered to have the kitchen remake them. "I just don't get why you people can't do it right the first time," the man muttered, not cruelly, but carelessly, the way some folks forget that service workers are human too. Julie flushed. "I'm very sorry, sir. I'll have that fixed for you right away." But Rick had already heard. He burst out of the kitchen like a wrecking ball. What's going on now? He barked, glaring at Julie. It's fine, the customer said, slightly embarrassed. She's already handling it. Rick ignored him and turned on Julie. How many times have I told you to check the orders before they go out? This is basic stuff. That was it. Thomas stood. The scrape of his chair echoed louder than Rick's voice. Heads turned. That's enough, Thomas said, his voice steady but commanding. Rick spun around, annoyed. And who the hell do you think you are? Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a laminated company ID. I'm Thomas Granger, he said firmly. I own this diner, and 12 others just like it. The room froze. Julie froze mid-step, her mouth slightly open. Connor peeked from the kitchen, a chef's knife still in hand. Even the customers stared in disbelief. Rick's face drained of color. I didn't know. No, Thomas cut him off. You didn't. Because if you had, you'd never treat my staff this way. He turned to Julie and said gently, You're doing fine. I'll handle this now. Then he looked at Rick and pointed to the back room. We need to talk. Now. The office was small, cluttered, and dimly lit. Its one window covered by a crooked blind. Thomas shut the door behind Rick and turned to face him. The manager's bravado from the dining room had evaporated. He stood rigid, arms folded, trying to salvage whatever authority he thought he had left. Do you have any idea how out of line you've been? Thomas asked, voice low but sharp. Rick opened his mouth, but Thomas raised a hand. Save it. I've seen enough. He stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to make it clear that the time for excuses was over. You've been here for what, 2 years? And in that time you've created a work environment where employees are afraid, customers are uncomfortable, and no one feels respected. That's not leadership. That's negligence. Rick's eyes dropped to the stained floor. I get it. I've been under a lot of pressure. You don't get to treat people like punching bags just because you're stressed, Thomas interrupted. We all deal with pressure. But dignity? That's non-negotiable. Rick's voice cracked. I can do better. Just give me another chance. Thomas shook his head. You had your chance. I trusted you with my business, with my people. And you abused that trust. There was a long pause. Then came the words Rick wasn't ready for. You're done here, Thomas said, firm and final. Effective immediately. Rick looked stunned. Wait, you're firing me? I'm terminating your employment, yes. HR will process your severance. You'll leave the premises today. Rick stood frozen for a long moment, jaw slack, then finally nodded and walked out, defeated, silent. Thomas exhaled, ran a hand through his graying hair, and glanced toward the door. It hadn't been easy, but it was right. And in his heart he knew. This was the first real step toward healing what had been broken. The lunch rush had thinned, but the tension hadn't quite lifted. Julie stood near the counter, still stunned, while Connor peeked out from the kitchen, his apron stained and hands fidgeting. Customers whispered among themselves. A few even clapped softly. Though whether it was for the eggs or for what they just witnessed, no one could really say. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped forward. I want to thank all of you, he said, his voice carrying through the room, for your hard work and patience. He looked directly at Julie and Connor. Things are going to change around here. Starting today. Julie blinked, unsure how to respond. Connor gave a cautious nod. After the last customer left and the open sign flipped to closed, the hum of the drink cooler was the only sound left in the room. Julie and Connor stood by the counter, hesitant, unsure if they were in trouble, or being asked to clean up. Thomas motioned to a booth near the back. Come sit with me. We need to talk. They followed him slowly, exchanging uncertain glances. Thomas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. First off, he said, thank you for keeping this place going. What I saw today and yesterday, I can't overlook that. Julie looked down at her hands. It hasn't always been easy, but I do care about the customers. That's why I stay. Thomas nodded. I could see that. I heard it in how you spoke to them, even the ones who were rude. He turned to Connor. And you. I saw you stand up when no one else would. That says something. Connor shrugged. I couldn't just keep quiet. Someone needed to speak up. Thomas gave a small smile. That's what real leadership looks like. And starting now, I intend to reward it. What came next would change both of their lives, but neither of them could have imagined just how much. You both deserve better, he said, his voice steady. And not just words. Real action. Julie and Connor exchanged nervous glances, unsure what that meant. Thomas leaned in, folding his hands on the table. First, he began, I'm hiring a new general manager for this location. Someone experienced. But more importantly, someone who knows how to lead with empathy and respect. Until that person is in place, I'll be here personally, helping manage the transition. Julie's eyes widened. You mean you're staying? Thomas nodded. For as long as it takes. Connor tilted his head. And Rick? He won't be coming back, Thomas answered plainly. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here. And neither should either of you. A quiet sigh of relief passed between them. Second, he continued, we're done running short-staffed. I've already approved additional hiring. No more being expected to handle 5 roles at once. Everyone deserves real breaks, a chance to breathe. Julie gave a tiny grateful laugh. That would be amazing. Thomas smiled. Third, and this is long overdue. You're both getting raises. Connor's jaw dropped. Wait, seriously? Thomas turned to him. Connor, you've shown more leadership in 3 months than some do in 3 years. I'm promoting you to assistant manager. Effective immediately. Connor looked stunned. I've never managed anyone before. You already are, Thomas replied. That's what stepping up looks like. He turned to Julie. And you 8 months of dedication, grace under pressure, care for every customer. That matters. Starting next week, you'll see a significant pay increase. I'm also establishing a staff bonus system, so people like you are recognized and rewarded. Julie's hand covered her mouth, tears welling. I don't know what to say. You don't have to, Thomas said gently. Just know this, you matter. And I see you. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for the diner, but for the people who kept its heart beating. Over the following weeks, Thomas Granger became a familiar face at the Maple Ridge Diner. Not as a CEO, but as someone willing to roll up his sleeves. He brewed coffee in the early morning hours. He helped mop floors after closing. But most importantly, he listened. He held staff meetings where everyone had a voice. He watched how the kitchen flowed, where the bottlenecks were, and what tools needed replacing. He even stood behind the line next to Connor, who quickly grew into his role as assistant manager, earning the respect of his team not through authority, but through example. Julie, meanwhile, bloomed. With a lighter workload and proper support, she no longer looked over her shoulder with worry. Her smiles became genuine. Her steps less hurried. She took time with guests again, refilling coffee with warmth, asking about grandchildren, laughing with longtime regulars. For the first time in months, she enjoyed coming to work. Thomas hired 3 new employees within 2 weeks, including a dishwasher and 2 part-time servers. And when Denise, an experienced and kind-hearted professional, arrived as the new general manager, the team welcomed her like a long-lost friend. Her leadership style echoed everything Thomas had once envisioned. Respectful, patient, and people-first. Customers noticed the shift. Some left handwritten thank you notes. Others returned with friends. The buzz around town was simple but powerful. Granger's is back. One afternoon, as Thomas grabbed his coat by the door, Julie stopped him. Mr. Granger, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. He turned, smiling. Just Thomas. She nodded, her eyes sincere. I just wanted to say, this place feels different now. Better. Like it matters again. Thomas looked around the diner, at the smiling staff, the clinking dishes, the hum of life returning. It does matter, he said quietly. And so do you. As he stepped outside, the doorbell jingling behind him, Thomas felt something he hadn't in years. Pride, not in the business, but in the people who kept its soul alive. He didn't just fix a restaurant, he restored dignity. What began as an undercover visit turned into a reckoning. And in that reckoning, he rediscovered the truth he'd nearly forgotten. Real leadership doesn't stand at the top. It stands beside the people who show up every day with aching feet, tired hands, and open hearts. Julie's gentle smile. Connor's quiet courage. The way the diner buzzed again with warmth and laughter. That was the business Thomas had set out to build years ago. He hadn't just saved a location. He had saved its soul. And more importantly, he had listened. We live in a world that often measures success by numbers, profits, speed, performance. But true success is how people feel when they work beside you or walk through your door. Never be too proud to listen, too busy to care, or too high up to kneel down beside someone and simply say, I see you. Has someone ever stood up for you when it mattered most? Or maybe you were that person for someone else. Share your story below, we'd love to hear it. And if this message touched your heart, like, subscribe, and tap the so you won't miss our next powerful story about kindness, courage, and the quiet heroes among us.